I'm Patrick McCallum. I'm an associate in the commercial team at Wright Hassall Solicitors. Whether you're a business buying or selling goods or services, one of the most important things you can do to protect your business is have a set of terms and conditions in place. And here's 7 reasons why. Number 1, certainty. Certainty as to the terms that you've agreed with the other party. Now today, contracts are often agreed via a series of WhatsApp messages, phone calls, emails, texts, and that's great for doing business on the go, but it can be difficult to actually know what you've agreed to. Having a set of T's and C's in place allows you to have one place where all the terms are set out in black and white and both parties have certainty as to what they've agreed. Number 2, warranties and commitments. You want to have certainty as to what goods or services are being provided and the supplier's commitments and warranties as to how it's going to deliver those goods or services. And that could be a commitment to deliver goods by a specific time or date. It could be that services are going to be available X% of the time, or it could just be that the goods or services are going to comply with a particular description or specification. Whatever it is, T's and C's will be able to set out in writing what those commitments are, and it gives both parties certainty as to what they've agreed. From the supplier's perspective, its T's and C's will want to have as few commitments as possible, and the clauses within the T's and C's will water those commitments down. The customer will want to include as many as possible and also include contractual remedies which it can exercise should the supplier fail to perform. The third reason, and probably the most important one from the supplier's perspective, is that T's and C's can set out the supplier's liability to the customer. If the supplier fails to perform the contract for whatever reason, the customer may want to bring a claim against it for breach of contract, and T's and C's can set out the extent of the supplier's liability under that claim. Now, the supplier's T's and C's will do that by excluding particular types of loss, so the customer can't bring a claim for those at all, or more commonly, set out a financial cap which limits the amount of money the customer can claim from the supplier. The customer's T's and C's will want to keep that value as high as possible to maximise the amount that it can claim, or alternatively, it might not even mention supplier liability at all, thus establishing a position where the supplier has unlimited liability to the customer. Now, the 4th and 5th reasons why terms and conditions are so important go hand in hand, and that's so you have certainty as to 1, the price that's being paid, and 2, the payment terms around that price. It's obviously in both parties' interest to have certainty over what's being paid, but the customer will want to make extra clear in its T's and C's that there can't be any scope creep and the ability for the supplier to charge additional sums, and also in terms of expenses, they have to be agreed upfront with the customer before they're incurred. In terms of payment terms, the supplier's key concern is going to be reducing risk to its cash flow, and it will use its T's and C's to further that aim by, say, asking for a portion of the price to be paid upfront, and then the remainder of that price to be paid over regular intervals. Contrastingly, the customer's key concern is incentivising the supplier to deliver the goods or services in conformance with the contract, and it can use its T's and C's to do that by saying that payment only takes place once the goods or services have been delivered, and giving itself more generous payment terms, say 30, 60 or even 90 days after the date of invoice. Reason number 6 is making sure the parties know who owns what intellectual property, and that could be intellectual property that's being brought to the contract in order for the parties to perform their obligations, or new intellectual property that's created as a result of the contract. Now, the customer, particularly if it's receiving website development or software development services or things like that, will be keen to own the IP in the deliverables so that it can use that IP going forward in its business, and it will have its T's and C's setting out exactly that. On the supplier's side of things, often the IP and the goods or services is its crown jewels. It's the thing that gives the business real value. It will want to hold on to that wherever possible. So its T's and C's will make it very clear that whilst it's giving a license to the customer to use that IP, ultimately ownership stays with the supplier. And that will be the same for new IP that's created as well, so that the supplier can use that on future projects with other clients. The final reason, reason number 7, as to why T's and C's are so important, is that they can set out what termination rights the parties have. From the customer's perspective, it will want to have a right to terminate for material breach. For example, if the supplier fails to deliver goods or services that comply with the contract. It may also want to give itself flexibility to terminate, say, if it wants to, just because it wants to withdraw an order, and it will want to terminate prior to the supplier beginning to perform. Alternatively, the supplier will want in its T's and C's to include rights to terminate for non-payment by the customer, or where the customer is subject to an insolvency event. The supplier doesn't want to get caught into a contract with a customer that can't pay, so it will want to terminate in those circumstances. Now, if the supplier is feeling generous, it may also include a right for the customer to terminate prior to the supplier beginning to deliver the goods or services. But the key difference in its T's and C's, well, that will come with a termination fee that the customer has to pay. Now, all in all, those are some very key reasons why terms and conditions are so important. And if you're a business that doesn't have T's and C's in place, your position on all of these key issues is going to be unclear and uncertain, which ultimately leaves you exposed to both financial and commercial risk. So the lesson to take away is get some terms and conditions in place.